Hi, I'm Heather Smith, and welcome to Cloud Stories, a podcast exploring the accounting and business apps community. Today, I'm releasing a quick episode on the last day of the year to celebrate hitting 20,000 downloads during 2023. I've been watching that number very closely and just quite incredulous that on the last day of the year managed to hit 20,000 downloads. So thank you so much for listening and subscribing to the Cloud Stories podcast. Now, I'll just let you into a little thing. I have just come back from the Gold Coast, where I spent a week in an Airbnb overlooking Currumbin area, and I actually took my family down there, and we had a really wonderful week. And we took Chester, the border collie, down there, and there's a huge dog beach there. So it's about a 6-minute drive from where we were staying, and there's a huge dog beach. On one side it's really calm, and then on the one side it's quite surfy. And it just brings us so much joy to see Chester so happy, and he has come home. He's absolutely exhausted. He chased the waves. He protected us from the waves coming in. He swam. We had a floating frisbee, and we all got in the water with him, and we met up with friends, and he had such a fabulous time. And I always think if your dog has a good time, then you're probably having a good time too. That's our kind of philosophy. The house that we stayed in, the Airbnb house, was just amazing, and the people who let it out to us really came to it with the true feeling of the true vibe of what Airbnb should be, in that they were very welcoming to us. Nothing was too much problems, and I know that I've been to. Initially, when I started using Airbnb, it was good, and then it just seemed that everyone you touched had like 15 owners, and they were treating you like sort of, you found yourself in this dreadful situation that you were worried you're going to get kicked out. And I had some really bad experiences, but this one was a really lovely experience. Lovely pool, lovely. It overlooked. It was really high up. It was so high up I actually couldn't drive up the street because I'm terrified of heights. So I just sort of closed my eyes for most of the drive up the street. But the views were spectacular. And as you may be aware, the Gold Coast actually had a tornado Christmas Day evening, and that was actually in that area. So there was a lot of devastation there, but fortunately we were okay. We had a lot of rain, etc. during our time there, but it was like beautiful mornings, beautiful sunshine, beautiful swimming, and then afternoon, evening storms, and it just kind of repeated itself. We did actually get one morning storm, which is extraordinarily rare. Anyway, it was a lot about me, but I just wanted to say that I have had a lovely holiday, and I'm not a workaholic, and I encourage you to be relaxing. I just had the opportunity to release this episode as we'd hit 20,000 downloads, and when you're doing things on your own, you should celebrate these small wins. So, Cloud Stories is an accounting technology podcast, and I think in terms of accounting technology that we saw the most significant advancement from this year was conversations around AI and generative chat AI tools. Very much, as you'll know, I very much got into using ChatGPT, but there are other tools out there as well. And AI has been around for many, many years, but it just seems to be talked about. Is it here? What's happening with it? So that has been quite interesting to use. And my adoption of ChatGPT has really been quite phenomenal in terms of I do a lot of writing, communicating, storytelling around accounting, and so that has been supremely beneficial for me. And I actually asked it what sort of questions should I what sort of questions should I answer in a wrap-up of the podcast? And it has actually suggested a few which I'm going to use to structure this podcast for you. So, as you would expect, let me tell you what were the top 5 most popular episodes of 2023. And as you may realise, I record these episodes, I try and keep them as evergreen as possible. That means that you should be able to go back and listen to them and still find them useful. Our technology is advancing very rapidly, but the core of it will remain the same. Your car that you drive, may once have had a cassette tape, may once have moved to a CD player, and then has moved to a USB player, and now has perhaps moved to it just connects to your mobile device and actually plays your mobile device. But to actually drive the car, very little has changed for many types of cars. I know that there's been some advancements in terms of moving to electric vehicles, but very much the understanding and knowledge of how to drive the car has remained the same. And I think that a lot of these episodes, I do try and keep them as evergreen as possible. So when I mention them, you can go back and listen to the actual story. So, well, the most popular episode was live from Brisbane Zero Roadshow back in 2023. That was February 2023. And I interviewed a lot of people during that episode, including a funny interview with David Boyer of Change GPS. Now, what happens is, again, because they are evergreen episodes, the episodes that are released earlier in the year tend to look like they've ended up being more popular. But that was a great episode. Second most popular was tightening your internal financial controls. And that was an episode with Simon Foster from Xero and Cassandra Scott from Loris Bookkeeping. And a very good discussion on internal financial controls. And that was brought to us by the people at the lovely team at Approval Max. And I was part of that discussion as well. Then the third most popular episode, which is one that I have been trying to secure for many years, was an interview with Sarah Gopal. And it was a huge announcement in the Xero ecosystem about carbon integrating with Xero. So that was very exciting to hear. But there's also a lot of history and a lot of information in that episode. So hopefully you'll go back and listen to it. Fourth most popular episode was with Peter Laylor. And earlier in the year, it was around March time, there was an announcement from Xero that BlueRock have acquired the Workflow Max brand. And Peter shared with us the story behind the acquisition and what they plan to do with it. And that has been a story that has been quite interesting to follow here in Australia. About 9 or 10 businesses have come up and sort of suggested they're an alternative to Workflow Max. But also BlueRock are building this Workflow Max solution, and there's a lot of people vying in that space. So it has been really interesting to watch, and probably if we were to say in Australia what was the big story after AI and ChatGPT, it would be BlueRock acquiring the Workflow Max brand and what's next for Workflow Max users. Then the fifth episode was a really exciting one for me. It was back in February, and that was soaring into Newcastle Xero Roadshow. And Alex Falcon Harata flew in from Bali to go to the Newcastle Roadshow, and I hadn't seen her in ages. So I flew down to actually go to the Newcastle Roadshow, and we had a lot of fun walking around, interviewing people there, and it was a really interesting roadshow to attend. I think there was only like 200-300 people in attendance, but a lot of them had never attended a roadshow before, and we found it a really enjoyable experience and the opportunity to speak with everyone there. And that was we really enjoyed that. Look, let me throw in number 6, and this is sort of something extra. We recorded an episode of us at the Accountex conference, and it was Atomic Habits for Accountants and Bookkeepers. And that was a sensational episode. That has been a sensational discussion. And just that topic has been really interesting one to sort of follow and message and throw out there. And I found that for myself, grabbing a book that people were really interested in, a topic that people were really interested in, has been useful for throwing out different ideas, different conferences, different discussions. So it could be a whole discussion or part of a discussion, how you're using habits, how you're encouraging your clients to use habits. So I'm sure you benefit a lot from listening to that. I think I might do that again this year and choose a book that I can have alongside the topics that I'm talking about. Sometimes I think that helps people resonate and sort of grab on or latch on to what you're talking about, and you can take it from there. So currently I'm thinking that book will be Dare to Lead by Brené Brown, because I know that that's a very popular book amongst the accounting and bookkeeping community. But I'm going to have a think about it for the next few weeks. If you have any suggestions, let me know. To answer the question, how did the podcast evolve over the past year? Back in November 22, I bought myself a Rode wireless Go microphone. So it's 2 handheld Rode microphones. And after some practice and a few false starts, I successfully started recording podcasts at conferences and events. This has been a really enriching experience for me. It's really given me the opportunity to stretch my ability to think on my feet, and has also given me the opportunity to speak to guests that I may not have met otherwise. So it really has opened up a whole new world of podcasting to me, and I'm grateful that I've had the many years, I think 7 years behind me, to actually practice crafting questions and asking people questions, so that I'm in a sort of a position that I can hopefully do it on my feet and ask relevant, smart questions on the spot of people. I also think I also thought it would be useful, interesting to mention that I was trying to work out when I actually purchased the Rode wireless microphone, and I went into my Xero file and searched for microphone, and then searched for Rode, then searched for audio, and I couldn't find it. So I then went to my Translucent account, and I went in and I put in the search word microphone, and it instantly found the transaction for the microphone purchase, and the words microphone were actually on the receipt, so they weren't actually on the transaction. I was just able to click through into the Xero file and then click through to open up and see the microphone there. So I tried searching for probably 2 minutes within the Xero file, and then when I switched over to Translucent and using their find and search feature, I found it within seconds, okay? And that actually, I would say, is one of the most phenomenal advancements in technology this year, and it's free. So that Translucent is many different apps, but that actual part of the app is free. So what were the biggest sort of challenges faced in podcasting in 2023? I came to podcasting as a purist and really liked the concept of podcasting, but a lot of people seem to have gone vlogging, which is video blogging, and they're calling it podcasting, but I, as a purist, would say it's actually vlogging, video blogging, and they are creating the podcast through YouTube. They're then using StreamYard to broadcast on various channels, and they then have the sort of the visual interaction of people talking. So what you're getting is sort of a multi-dimensional piece of content, and that seems to be very successful. It seems that there's a lot of people who still don't understand how to listen to a podcast, what a podcast is, etc. So if you're listening, you get it, but there's a lot of people who don't, and it's like, if you're creating the content, are you doing yourself any favors if the audience are not on platforms to receive the content? So what they're doing makes a lot of sense, and I know that, for example, Jason Stats, I think, is running a daily podcast, but a daily YouTube channel, a daily broadcast on a YouTube channel. James Wright does daily TikTok updates, and I think the accounting podcast with Blake Oliver and David Leary are really actually moving into a lot of these broadcasting something on YouTube. Kind of conceptually, it starts off as a webinar, and then it's sort of pushing it out into sort of a podcast format. So it's interesting to see that evolution happen, and the different pieces of content happening out there. And as a trainer and as an educator, I appreciate the importance of shaping the content and the education piece to the audience. So it's a shame that it seems like there's a large percentage of people who don't get podcasting, but there is, and it's you kind of have to adapt to that. So that might be something that I look at adapting to in future. So feedback from listeners that surprised you most. I had a lovely feedback when I went and spoke at the accounting and finance show in Singapore. Lots of people came up to me and said that they listened to the podcast, and that was really lovely. And they said that they found it really informative and useful and helpful in their business. And it's interesting because I find a lot of people don't necessarily interact, but they do in person when I go to conferences. Now, if I was to pick my personal favourite episodes, looking back on it, there's so many, and I'm so grateful to that people actually spend time with me and share these conversations, which I in turn share with you. I was extremely nervous, but he was very gracious, and I really enjoyed meeting Philip Furlinger, who was one of the co-founders of Xero, and he shared a really long story about the early days of Xero. So I would encourage you to go back and listen to that episode. And he talked about a new app that he's working with called Upstock, which is such a brilliant concept if you are selling product, and if you're working for retailers who are looking to purchase locally produced product. So that's a good one. Really enjoyed my time with Darren Glanville, who currently is at Fathom but has been in the industry for many years, and sort of we were able to go back to the early days and share stories from the early days and beyond, and what he's looking for in the future. Such a wise person. He was so generous with his knowledge. I was really surprised to I went to Ainsley Damery invited me to the reboot camp, which was held at Sanctuary Cove, which is kind of on the northern edge of the Gold Coast. And I went there to the beach, and I actually used to work on the beach. I've worked at every restaurant on the Gold Coast in my youth. And we got to the beach and there was Graham Tennick standing there in his swimmers, which was quite a shock for me because I'd literally just stopped looking at a photo of him on LinkedIn winning one of the many awards he won in 2023. But that conference, I had the great pleasure of interviewing Graham Tennick, Gareth Williams, Paul Dunn, and Paul Miller, and just all of them were so rich in what they shared. So I do encourage you to listen to those. And also very excited to actually interview Michael Wood, the co-founder of what was once Receipt Bank but now Dext, and also the current founder of Translucent, and to go back and again hear the early days, that story, that journey, and where he's taking, where he saw a need in the market and how he is developing Translucent with so many people from the community, the early days, so many OGs as we call them. Yeah, so that's hopefully a few episodes to encourage you to go back and listen to. One of the most unexpected guests I had on in 2023 was part of the Accounting and Business Expo Sydney live session that I did, and it was a gentleman by the name of Malcolm Cameron, and he headed up a solution called My Treasure-E, which manages and monitors cash, payments, leases, and risk activities. And it was a world I knew nothing about, and I actually found it quite difficult to grasp. But I think that if people, it was relevant for them, then they would really benefit from having his solution in front of them. While a lot of my podcast interviews ended up at conferences, the most controversial topic for 2023 possibly also was conferences, which is kind of a shame because conferences shouldn't be the controversial topic. It should be a sort of almost a non-topic. But back in March, two conferences overlapped one another, one being in Sydney, which was Accountex, and the Accounting and Business Expo being in Melbourne. I always speak to the conference organisers and say, I'm here for the audience, for the accountants and bookkeepers, and I will be on your content crew or your advisory board, with my focus being on the audience of accountants and bookkeepers. And so it was working with both organisations. And yeah, look, Accounting and Business Expo went well, was very enjoyable, good number of people attended. I had to fly into Sydney to attend Accountex and arrived at about, I think it was like 11 a.m. I arrived, and it was like a ghost town. There was absolutely no one there. It was quite shocking. There had been some frustration in terms of the content at Accountex. I worked with the advisory on their content crew. We spent hours. We spent at least a dozen hours working on the content. And we had meetings, and then they took the content that we all had kind of worked on. There was maybe up to 20 of us had worked on, and they cut it into pieces and they threw it in the air like confetti, and where it landed they created bizarre panels, bizarre talks, and they did that and they published it without talking to us again about it. So suddenly an agenda appeared that I had no idea about, and was really quite shocked about. And it didn't make a lot of sense. People who are experts in particular areas were speaking on other topics that they were not experts on. And I, after all of that time, was allocated no speaking slots. which was, again, a bit frustrating, and I just thought, oh, okay, maybe they know what they're doing. Maybe they're doing something different that I don't understand. And then, unfortunately, they had the conference and no one turned up. So I guess I did feel like that I understood. So it was a very unusual situation. So that was unusual. No one from the conference organisers has come out and asked for our feedback on it. As the conference organisers, as part of the content crew, no one from that conference has ever come back and asked for our feedback. I received one email telling me that they knew what I was thinking, but apart from that, yeah, that was unfortunate. And I do think as conference organisers, look, being open to feedback throughout the process is important. Having a strong idea and a strong vision is also important, because sometimes you'll get pulled in too many directions, and you can't do that. But it's important to be aware of feedback and remember who the audience is. So that was probably the most controversial thing. I don't like talking about stuff like that. It was all very unfortunate. Wasn't good for anyone, but it is what it is. That was probably one of the most controversial things that happened in Australian accounting, sort of business technology universe in 2023, as well as what I've already spoken about, which is Workflow Max, and the purchase of Workflow Max and sort of the evolution of what will happen there. So how do I plan to evolve the podcast in the coming years? I think, as I mentioned before, I think I'll look into other ways to share content and be smart about that. I do like the pure podcasts, but if the platform is not, if using other platforms helps reach other people, then I will do that. What advice would I give to someone starting a podcast in the accounting world? There does seem to be a huge number of new podcasts that start and then they stop and then they start again. And I think my advice would be to get on other podcasts, listen to podcasts, get on other podcasts as a guest, and even come to it and propose the topics. Do not use PR firms. Like every time we release an episode, I get a dozen emails from PR firms wanting their clients to be on the podcast, and they clearly haven't listened to it, and it's clearly the same pitch they're giving other people. However, like I was on the Content Bite podcast, which is actually a writing podcast. It's one of the podcasts not from the accounting world that I listen to, and I listened to dozens and dozens of episodes, and so I actually pitched them and I explained why. I explained what I felt we could talk about and the topics. I suggested questions, and I let them know which were my favourite episodes of their podcast, and how their podcast had impacted me, etc. So it's a matter of that was a podcast that was kind of a bit of a goal of mine to be on that podcast. There was no benefit. I wasn't going to be selling anything on the podcast. It was just a matter of I enjoyed it and wanted to give it a go. But that pitching element of listen to the podcast, be aware of it, and then pitch if you are interested in being on a podcast. Don't use a PR agency. Engage when people are publishing the podcast. They'll get to know you. And also you can, the other thing that I would suggest is if you're considering starting your own podcast, record short audio and submit it to podcasts that you like. And sometimes there's a number of podcasts out there that will actually play that short audio because it's relevant. and they can sort of get it within. So you, rather than going to like a 1 hour podcast can take 5 hours to produce, okay? It's not simply a matter of it just starts. It can be a lot of work to get there. So that might be an easy way to get that muscle going and get that muscle working. So how do I celebrate 20,000 downloads? Well, I'm creating this wrap-up podcast because I hit the 20,000 downloads. I jumped into Canva and created a nice image for it, which I'll enjoy putting up on LinkedIn, and hopefully we can celebrate together. And hopefully, it means that there's a lot more podcasting opportunities coming forward in 2024. So, what are my goals for the podcast in 2024? Well, this is an unusual one because I think that for me personally, 2023 has been this amazing Technicolor present year that I'm so extraordinarily grateful for, and that so many things have happened to me, both in podcasting, the opportunities that have come up, and that I've been able to stretch and interview people who I do find quite intimidating. So I come to it that I really just the fact that they share their stories to me, I'm sitting here in sort of shock and sort of tears welling in my eyes that I'm so excited by what gets to happen, and I just can't imagine that 2024 can be any better than 2023. So. I'm kind of I'm not even a deer in headlights. I don't know what it is, but I can't imagine that any year could be better than 2023 for me. But what are my goals? Like, what I'd like to say is I'm going to start opening up for sponsorship on the podcast. And I will do that gently and see how that goes. It's something I've been able to avoid for some time now, but I feel that I really need to go down that route, the sponsorship route, because I'm just approached so often about it that I need to go down that route, and hopefully then it can support me in other ways in what I'm doing for the community. One of the things I wanted to highlight for people is if they invite me on to host a webinar, and it is of a suitable nature, very often I will turn that into a podcast. So that is something that if apps are running their own webinars, that's something that they should consider inviting me to host and work with them on the content of a webinar, so it can then be reproduced as a podcast through my network and my platform. I'm looking forward to going to conferences in 2024, and let me just get my list of conferences I'm going to. So I'm going to be in Birmingham in March, going to the FAB conference, which is the Festival of Accountants and Bookkeepers in Birmingham. So hopefully I will see you there. There's a number of conferences on my list that are sort of fingers crossed, hopefully that they'll come off, but I'm not sure if they will. But I definitely plan to go to Nashville to XeroCon in August of this year. Never been to Nashville, and I will use that as a trip across the US. So please get in contact if you will be there as well. Also looking to go to the Accounting and Biz show in Singapore, and that's in October. So those are the ones I'm definitely going to. There's actually very few conferences happening in Australia. So that's kind of an interesting year. But there's always stuff happening, so I'll find something to do. But that's kind of, I think, highlights some of my goals for podcasting in 2024. The overseas conferences I plan to go to. And I should also highlight that Alex Falcon-Harata and I have done conferences in Australia, live from the floor podcast episodes in Australia, in Singapore, and it looks like we'll be able to get together in Birmingham and do that as well. So that's wonderful. So that's quite an amazing outcome for it all. Okay, so hopefully that is a useful wrap-up of 2023 from the Cloud Stories podcast. I want to highlight that for some of the episodes, not for all of them, but for some of them, you can gain free CPE from the Cloud Stories podcast via the Earmark CPE mobile app. So search and download the Earmark CPE app and then search for Cloud Stories podcast. You register for a course, which is essentially the podcast, and you answer a few questions related to the podcast learning outcomes, and you earn 1 hour of verifiable CPE. So you can actually, as you enter into the new year, you can actually get hours of CPE while using the Earmark app, listening to the Cloud Stories, some of the back episodes, and exercising or spring cleaning or whatever you want to do in your New Year's. Thanks for listening to my wrap-up of the Cloud Stories podcast for 2023. From here, I suggest you join the Zero Mastermind group on Facebook for advanced conversations around the ecosystem. Subscribe to the Informative Accounting Apps newsletter, which gives you a great overview of the ecosystem space, available at heathersmithau.com. I encourage you to connect with me on LinkedIn and subscribe to the Cloud Stories podcast. If you're listening right now, you can hit subscribe while you're listening. I'm Heather Smith, and I wish you health and happiness in 2024.